Hi, I'm Bruce Moody, and I'm with Military Community and Family Policy. We're a Department of Defense agency, and we help military families navigate military life. We're the ones who bring you Military One Source. Joining us today is Nancy Casper, and she is from the Federal Emergency Management Agency. We all call it FEMA. Nancy Casper has been with FEMA for more than 30 years. She's been involved in all sorts of natural disasters, including hurricanes Irma and Maria and Katrina, Superstorm Sandy, and she was involved in the response to the 9/11 terror attacks. Today, Nancy plays a significant role in FEMA's response to the pandemic, which is why she's with us today. Nancy is going to be sharing with us information about FEMA's COVID-19 Funeral Assistance Program. So Nancy, it is a pleasure to have you with us today. Welcome.
Thank you, Bruce. It's a pleasure to be with you and your community today.
Absolutely. What I want to do is kind of go over the generally what the program is, why we're doing it, and then kind of get into a few of the nuts and bolts of the program. So, and feel free to speak to this. But so far as I understand it, the funeral assistance program will reimburse funeral expenses for individuals whose death was either caused by or likely the result of COVID-19 if they died in the U.S. Do I have that right?
You do. So for anyone who incurred funeral expenses after January 20th of last year, and the death is attributed to COVID, and we're being very broad in what we mean by attributed to COVID. So we're really following the CDC guidance. So as you stated, phrases like may have been caused by, was likely a result of COVID-19, anything like that, we would consider sufficient attribution.
All right then. So when we look at the eligibility for the program and we're talking to this community, it means that service members, civilians, contractors, veterans, and family members, if they paid for the funeral of a loved one who died of COVID-19 effective January 2020 to present, they may be eligible for reimbursement of up to $9,000. Do we have that correct?
You do. So if I could just take a minute, I'll run through some of the eligibility
Absolutely.
criteria. I think they're real straightforward for people. And so before I do that, let me just take a minute to thank the men and women on the phone today and with us today. I too am the proud daughter of a Marine and the mother of an Army soldier. And I, like many of you, unfortunately lost both of them last year, although not due to COVID. In a COVID environment. And so I too was unable to have maybe the service I wanted to have for my loved ones and honor them in the way I wanted. And certainly I didn't expect to have to pay for funerals back to back unexpectedly. And so I understand the financial burden that puts on families. And so I think when I got this assignment, I really tried to take my personal experience and bring it to the table as we develop some of the policy in order to make this as effective as we can for folks and ensure that people get reimbursed in a timely manner. So in regards to the eligibility, the applicant does need to be a citizen, a non-citizen national, or a qualified alien. As we talked about, they have to have incurred those expenses sometime after January 20th, 2020 and ongoing, because unfortunately people are continuing to pass away from the pandemic. There's no requirement that the decedent have to be a U.S. citizen, non-citizen, national, or qualified alien. Funeral expenses, as I said, after January 20th of last year, the death needs to have occurred within the U.S., including the territories or the District of Columbia. And as we talked about, Bruce, the death needs to be attributed to COVID-19 within that state or territory where the death occurred, as indicated on the death certificate. And we can talk about that in a minute when we speak to some of the documentation requirements. And then funeral expenses can't be covered by another source. So for example, if like the elderly couple across the street from me prepaid their funeral 10 years ago in anticipation that someday they would pass, they prepaid their funeral. So we couldn't cover what another source like that is intended to cover. And that would also apply in the case of National Cemetery Association and things they may cover, headstones or things if you're going through the Veterans Administration for those types of additional benefits. So that's really the eligibility criteria. It's pretty simple. They have to be a U.S. citizen, have incurred the cost sometime after January 20th of last year. And if you'd like, I can take a minute to talk about the documentation requirements.
Absolutely. Yeah, of course, really sorry for your loss. And I can see from you sharing your story how a program like this is a real help to someone who's in this situation. So yes, please go ahead.
Thank you for that. And you're right. I think, again, as we talk about the documentation, that was kind of the first place where my personal experience maybe came into play in informing how we roll this out. So we need documentation of the expense. And I know in my case, I thought I couldn't begin to tell you where the receipts are from those funerals. I don't know. But I do know that I signed a contract with that funeral home. And if I can't find the contract, I can probably call the funeral home and get another copy. So we put it into the requirement that proof of those funeral expenses can be anything from a receipt to an invoice to that actual funeral home contract. And the great thing too about a contract is perhaps you didn't have the money yet to pay off that contract. You entered into the contract, you've signed a legal commitment to pay in the form of that contract, but you weren't expecting this unexpected death. And so you haven't been able to pay that funeral home. You'll actually be able to submit the contract as proof of a funeral expense and be reimbursed based on that contract. And then you'll be able to pay your debt to that funeral home. So again, I think we took that into consideration in the development of how we roll this out. The other thing we need in addition to proof of those expenses is a copy of the death certificate. And as I said, the death certificate does need to indicate that the death may have been caused by or was likely a result of COVID-19 or COVID-19-like symptoms. So if you had someone that perhaps passed away early in the pandemic and their death certificate maybe says something like flu or pneumonia, but you're very confident it's COVID, you will have to go back to that certifying official and ask them to amend the death certificate to say COVID-19. We do need that documentation to prove it was COVID-19 related, because the legislation that authorized this program wants us to provide reimbursement based on COVID-19. And then lastly, if you did have a prepaid funeral, or some cases like in California, I believe it's fairly common to have burial insurance. If you have something like that, we would need to see that documentation so that we can reduce your award by whatever that insurance may have covered. But we'll certainly take a look at what wasn't covered by it and pay for it if we can. So those are the documentation requirements. The award, as you said already, is $9,000 per decedent. And you may have some questions about multiple deaths and things like that if you'd like to discuss those.
Yes, well, one of the questions I did have is for the individual who was responsible for more than one funeral, is there a limit? Can they put in multiple requests?
Yeah, that's a great question. And unfortunately, we do know that many people lost several folks within their loved ones due to COVID. So you can apply for more than one death. We're going to register you according to the state in which the death occurred. And each state will have a maximum of $35,500. So let me give you a couple different examples. Let's say that I live in Colorado. Let's say I had 4 siblings who all passed away in Ohio. I could get reimbursed up to $9,000 under the state of Ohio's disaster for each one of those 4 siblings, but I would hit the cap at $35,500 because that's a maximum per state or territory. But let's say that 2 were in Ohio and 2 were in Florida. Then I would create one registration for the 2 in Ohio, and I would create a second registration for the 2 in Florida, and I could be reimbursed up to $9,000 each, meaning up to $18,000 in Ohio and up to $18,000 in Florida.
So as you're discussing the process, there is obviously documentation that is required. But in terms of your efforts to make the process as simple as possible, can you speak to, your motivation to making it as simple as possible and how you go about doing that?
Yeah, so things, again, I know when I was in the situation, I was really overwhelmed. I was, again, not expecting deaths in my family. You had COVID going on, you had a whole lot going on. And I was just not prepared. And I was so thankful to the funeral home that helped me so much. The funeral home helped me get copies of the death certificate that I needed in order to file Social Security benefits for my grandchildren, in order to work with the VA on veterans benefits for my mom, things like that. So the first thing I thought of is we've got to find a way to engage with funeral homes and get their support and help in this initiative. And so we've done that with some of the large associations, and they've committed to helping support family members that they've worked with this last year and a half in gathering documentation, obtaining additional copies of the death certificate, providing them copies of their receipts or their contracts if they need it. So the funeral home industry has been overwhelmingly supportive of the initiative and helping families apply. The other component to this is, quite frankly, in the way we're doing the registrations. And so we are only accepting registrations through a phone line. And so I believe in the chat, we'll be posting the phone number for everybody so you know what number you can call. And that number is open Monday through Friday. Excuse me, I have a bit of a cold. I apologize. 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. Central Standard Time or Central Daylight Time. So we are very thankful for the phone system. And so we've got thousands of call agents that are trained. And we did that very deliberately because, again, if you've been through a difficult time and a stressful time, sometimes it can be difficult to try to navigate online portals or online systems. And this allows you then to speak with a person. And that person can help walk you through the process, ask you the appropriate questions, and then guide you on how to get your documentation to FEMA. And so you can mail it in, or you can fax it in, or there will be a way to upload it online after you register with FEMA, which of course is the quickest way to get it to us. But given the scope and scale of the program, I want to manage expectations with people that we have hundreds of thousands of people applying, as you can imagine. And so it can take up to 10 days for your documentation to kind of show up in our system, because we're just getting so many documents that we have to scan and upload. So be patient, but we are working through cases as quickly as possible because we understand how important it is to get money into the hands of families as quickly as we can.
Understood, certainly. And that phone number, we'll leave that up for a little bit longer, but that is the absolute best first step for people to take.
Correct. That is the only way to apply for FEMA.
So for how long will this program run? Do you have an end date?
We don't. So there's currently no deadline to apply. And that's also important to note because we recognize that there are some states that unfortunately are really backlogged in being able to produce things like death certificates for people because they've had such a toll from the pandemic. And so there's no deadline to register at this time. Unfortunately, we continue every day to lose people due to the pandemic. So if and when the day comes, and it will eventually, when we put a deadline to the program, we'll publicize that well in advance and make sure everybody has plenty of time to get their paperwork in.
So we did say, absolutely, step number one is to call this number. But we are going to put in the section down below. We've got a link to some frequently asked questions, and we've got some videos. And these videos are in English, Spanish, and ASL for people to get a general overview. But absolutely, once you've read the FAQs, once you've watched the videos, step number one, go to the phone call. Any last words that you'd like to share with us?
No, again, I think a couple things that are important to know. If you're like my family and you have siblings and maybe several of you participated in the expenses, you should apply under one application. And so I'm the youngest in my family. In this case, maybe my big brothers finally have to be nice to me because I'm the one that turns in the application. I apply, they give me their receipts. I add it to my receipt. We turn it all in, and then I get the money and divvy it out to my brothers according to how they've treated me for my life. No, I'm kidding. But we're encouraging people to apply under one registration because unfortunately, if they both apply, the only way we have to discern between them is whoever turns in their documentation the first. So that's who will get the money. And we don't want to, it'd be much better for people to, just as you collaborated on the expenses, collaborate on the registration and come in under one registration, and you can all turn in your receipts to that one person who can apply on your behalf as long as they helped incur some of those expenses. So that's a critical piece to know. I do encourage all of you to watch the video because it does explain what information you need when you call, things like your social security number, the social security number of the decedent if available. It walks through what you're going to need when you call us, and then it also walks through, again, the documentation requirements, and would suggest, again, people do that before they call so that they're ready with all the information when they make their call to FEMA.
Great. Nancy, thank you so much for joining us today. I know you're not alone. I know there's a number of people from FEMA who are off camera. So for those of you who have questions or comments or opinions, thoughts you want to share about the FEMA's COVID-19 Funeral Assistance Program, you can go into our comments. Folks from FEMA will get back to you and respond to what you have to say. We also have people from Military One Source as well. That goes for whether you're watching this event live or most likely you're watching this as a recorded event. Nancy Casper from the Federal Emergency Management Agency, what we call FEMA. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me, Bruce, and thank you again to the men and women that serve our country every day. We're so thankful for what you all do. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye, everybody.